This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 146 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, we're going to look at some of the ideas that are being proposed and tried for reopening schools after the pandemic. I don't need to give you much background here. As you all know, schools have been closed worldwide in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in the same way that cities are at various stages of reopening businesses, schools are doing the same thing, or at least thinking about how it might work. We all know that unless someone develops a vaccine soon, schools just can't be run the same way as they were before. There's reinfection to consider, second and third waves of cases that could cause new shutdowns, and on a more distant horizon, the stark possibility that new viruses could take us down just like this one did. I figure right now educators everywhere are trying to decide the best course of action, or at least wondering what their district leadership is considering. Since I have access to a lot of educators all over the place, I believe the best way I can help with that process is to ask you all what you're doing and then curate those ideas so that they can reach more people. So about a week ago, I tweeted out a request for ideas. I got some from there, some from my own searching, some from other Twitter feeds, and some from the legwork that Larry Ferlazzo already did on this topic. And I've got a link to some of his articles in the post. I've got to say that reading through all of the different proposals and ideas was overwhelming, especially when I clicked through to look at the densely packed documents that detailed all the different distancing and disinfecting protocols that had to be considered. I would give each one about 30 seconds and then I just wanted to run away. The words just swam together after a while. I'm guessing you may have experienced something similar at some point, and I just wanted to validate that for you. Yes, it's overwhelming. So in the spirit of contributing something of value here, rather than adding to the overwhelm, I am going to do three things. First, I'm going to give you something practical. I will very quickly run through 7 different ideas people are considering for reopening schools. I was kind of excited about one idea in particular because it's something a little different and it might actually work. So that's the first part. The second part will also be practical, but a little more random. In that section, I'm going to share other thoughts and ideas that I've seen floating around that connect to school reopenings but aren't necessarily tied to specific plans. The third part of this will be more of a pep talk. I'm not sure how much good it will do, but I want to talk a little bit about what I would be doing right now if I were a classroom teacher bracing myself for the upcoming school year. My hope is to offer something that will help you get through this. Before we get started, I want to thank ViewSonic for sponsoring this episode. ViewSonic has been dedicated to being part of the educational community for over 30 years. They want to help the millions of teachers and students finding themselves trying to learn from home. They're currently offering free access to their MyViewBoard digital whiteboarding software, giving teachers all the distance learning tools they need to continue to conduct classes. Now, MyViewBoard includes new features released for distance learning. Check it out today and get access at myviewboard.com/distance-learning. That's myviewboard.com/distance-learning. Support also comes from PowerSchool. PowerSchool knows that teachers go above and beyond for students. But teachers need help too, especially as they're asked to do more every day. That's why PowerSchool, now with Schoology, combines SIS, LMS, and assessment technology, empowering teachers with more time for what really matters. Visit powerschool.com/timeforteachers to find out how teachers are using technology to unlock student success. That's powerschool.com/timeforteachers. Now let's talk about the different ways schools are looking at reopening. So before I start on all of these options, I just have to acknowledge something. All of these ideas completely suck compared to pre-pandemic life. They are depressing and repressive, and in a lot of schools, not even realistic. In a post published this past week, third grade teacher Paul Murphy floated the idea that reopening schools under the proposed constraints may not be worth it at all. And I'm going to read a quote from his post, and I do have a link to that in my post. Here's what he says. Why should we assume that placing young people in an environment of masked peers whom they aren't allowed to approach will result in an improved mental state? And if adults are going to be serious about restrictions, they'll have to enforce them. It's my deep suspicion that punishments for hugging friends, admonishments for encroaching on 6-foot personal bubbles, vigilant surveillance of hand washing and line spacing, daily temperature checks that send a recurrent message that everyone else is to be feared, and possible repeated school closures when someone inevitably catches the virus will not produce an atmosphere conducive to improved mental health. I agree with him to a large extent. But I also think it makes sense to try something, to try some kind of arrangement that gets more teachers in rooms with more students at least some part of the week. Because among all the lessons we've learned from this pandemic, one has certainly been that video conferencing just isn't the same as face-to-face. With that said, here are some ideas that look like they might sort of kind of work. This is not an exhaustive list. I saw some ideas that would work only in schools that have very low numbers, where all students return full-time, but everyone just spreads out. This doesn't seem like a realistic option for most schools. I'm also not going to get into all the hand washing, disinfecting, and testing protocols, nor will this post address transportation. We will just focus on how schools might arrange the instructional component. Also, some schools are looking at hybrid models that combine some of these solutions or set up a plan where they toggle in between them depending on how infection stats are looking in their region at any given time. So with all of that said, these are just sort of the skeleton ideas that schools might want to build on. So solution 1 is alternating days or half days. Schools would run A-B schedules where some students come on A days and others on B days. Those not at school would be doing remote learning at home. Another variation of this is doing half days, like kindergarten used to be in a lot of places, and it might still be, where half the student population goes to school in the morning and half goes in the afternoon. Solution 2 is cohorts. Students are put into small groups that stay together all day, thereby mixing students with each other as little as possible. For changing classes or subject areas, the teachers are the ones who would move throughout the building. Obviously, by the way, all of these have different advantages and disadvantages. All I'm doing right now is just sharing the structures themselves. Okay, so solution 3 is selective return of grade level students or teachers. In this arrangement, a limited number of students and teachers would return to in-person schooling, while others would continue doing school remotely. And I'm going to break this down a little bit more. Some schools are looking at in-person instruction just for kindergarten and grade 1 to keep those students on track for early literacy and math skills. Also for vulnerable students who need more help for one reason or another, whether it's that they have IEPs and need more scaffolding or that they need other types of help. Students without home technology, and then seniors who actually need to be kept on track for graduation. So they're sort of selecting the students that need the in-person learning the most compared to the general population. This idea may also be applied to certain teachers and staff members. Those over 55 or those who are at higher risk for infection might continue to teach from home while a substitute holds down the fort in the physical classroom. So the teacher might broadcast a video, for example, from home and still do all the communicating and management from home. And then there's another adult in the room just to sort of manage the student bodies, but someone else would actually be doing the teaching. Another solution, this is solution 4, and this is the one that I thought was probably the most interesting, is one course at a time. This one kind of blew my mind when I saw it, and I found it in a tweet by a science teacher named Sam Long, and I think it has real potential. Students stay in the same class with the same teacher, taking a single course for a few weeks, and then rotate to another course for a few weeks. So instead of changing classes once an hour, they would change once every 2 weeks or so. Some people push back on this idea because they hated the thought of students sitting in the same class for so long. But if a teacher is mixing things up, delivering instruction in an engaging way, providing good breaks, and not requiring long periods of sitting, it could work. The only thing that could still stand in the way of this working would be social distancing requirements. It solves the problem of kids not mixing too much with the general population, but you couldn't have classes at full capacity. But maybe something like this combined with an A, B, or half-day schedule could be something to try. So I'm going to review those first four before we move on to the last few. So the first solution is alternating days or half-days. Solution 2 is cohorts, where students just sort of stay in the same group all day long. 3 is where you only bring back certain kids, certain grade levels, and certain teachers to the building because they would stand to benefit the most from the face-to-face instruction. And solution 4 is just one course at a time. Solution 5 is one-room schoolhouse. In this arrangement, students would stay in one room all day studying multiple subjects with the same teacher. This could work in some elementary schools where teachers are already somewhat used to teaching more than one subject and right now tend to only rotate for a few subjects. But again, social distancing protocols would still have to be kept, so you couldn't operate at full capacity. To make this work instructionally, teachers might need to shift to more of a project-based learning approach, where students are engaged in long-term projects that incorporate learning from multiple subject areas. Kids could still interact with teachers from other rooms, maybe through the phone, video conferencing, or just maybe by standing far apart out in the hall. But in order to be available for those kinds of conferences, teachers would need more planning time, and that would need to be staggered so that they could still consult with kids in other rooms. Instruction could also be delivered in this kind of one-room schoolhouse scenario through video mini lessons. In episode 62, I interviewed teachers at the Apollo School, and this is a school within a school where students spend a block of 3 hours every day in a combined English, history, and art class. Each teacher in this group offers daily mini lessons on relevant topics, and students attend these voluntarily based on their needs and projects. So if schools were to try the one-room schoolhouse option, it might be possible to do something similar, where a group of teachers shares a larger group of students, but each teacher actually stays with only part of the group in their classroom, and students can attend video broadcast mini lessons being given by teachers in other rooms. If all students in this arrangement were working on cross-curricular projects, this could ultimately be an improvement over the kind of traditional instruction they had before. So, although I was really excited about the one course at a time option, just for sort of continuing to deliver instruction the way we always have, and that just rearranges the time, doing something like a one-room schoolhouse could really be an exciting way to really change the way we're teaching our students. Obviously, it would require a lot more cross-curricular planning between teachers, but I think it's the type of thing where if I were heading into a new school year and we were looking at doing this, I would actually be starting to get a little bit excited about the possibilities instead of being resigned to this sort of consolation prize of teaching that we were getting handed because of the virus. You know, the other nice thing about something like that kind of arrangement is that if all students are sort of working on their own long-term projects, it really does lend itself to not needing to have everybody in the room at the same time. It would lend itself very well to something like an A-B schedule where kids are just coming in every other day, sort of updating you on their progress with their projects. You know, you're helping as needed. They're attending many lessons and you know, otherwise they're just sort of working kind of independently but parallel, because I think in these types of settings, kids do collaborate a lot too. So that's another one to look at as a consideration. So solution 6 is individual learning plans. This is another one that I saw sort of thrown out there on Twitter, that every student and family should get an individualized plan. And at first I really didn't think this was realistic. The idea of creating separate plans for every single student, depending on their individual situation, learning needs, available technology, home resources, seemed like it was almost an impossible task. But the more I thought about it, I kind of changed my mind, because it's something that might be accomplished with maybe 5 or 6 basic plans. So, for example, you have some students who are on plan 1, which is full-time home instruction with no technology, say. Those students would have specific needs. They need to be on some sort of paper delivery system. The school might need to set up weekly face-to-face meetings between the family and an assigned teacher who kind of monitors their progress. Other students might be on Plan 2, which is full-time home instruction with reliable technology. Plan 3 might be coming to school on some days. And so for each subject area and grade level, things would need to be further individualized. But I'm realizing that while every student has different needs, there may be groups of students whose needs are similar. So these individual plans may be something that could be batched so that, you've got 7 or 8 different versions and you're not necessarily looking at creating hundreds and hundreds of individual plans, but those hundreds of students get one of 7 or 8 different plans. Still a lot of work, obviously, but maybe not as much as I initially thought. So solution 7 is keep distance learning. Amid all the discussion of how to reopen, I keep thinking things the way they are with 100% distance learning is an option. Many schools have already done a trial run, and there may be some lessons that can be applied the next time around. Obviously, getting all students connected is a must, or at the very least, finding good workable ways to stay in touch without the internet. But if all of those are possible, it may be the most realistic approach, at least for the start of the school year. Again, like all of these other options, it is not great, but at least it's a known quantity, unlike the other arrangements that could potentially result in everyone bouncing back to distance learning anyway. So I'll quickly review those options one more time before we move on to part 2. Option 1, alternating days or half days. Option 2, cohorts, where everyone stays together all day. 3 is where selective return of grade level students or teachers, only some people come back and everybody else sort of stays home full time. Solution 4 is one course at a time, where you just take one class for a few weeks and then you shift to another class for a few weeks and so on. Solution 5 is one-room schoolhouse, which could be more of sort of a multidisciplinary project-based learning type of approach. Solution 6 is individual learning plans, where everybody has a slightly different program based on their situation. And solution 7 is to just keep doing distance learning, but maybe do it better than we did it in the spring. Okay, so those are the ideas that are getting thrown out there. Part 2 is other considerations. These are some other ideas that have been mentioned in conversations about reopening that I think are worth considering, regardless of the plan that you come up with. The first consideration is remediation versus acceleration. When planning instruction for the upcoming year, the temptation may be to focus on remediation, to go back to wherever students left off before quarantine and teach from that point forward, rather than starting the new school year where you might normally start. Doing this sort of skill recovery approach, it seems logical, and it's probably what I would have done too, but something I read the other day caused me to rethink that. This was an article about the lessons learned after New Orleans schools closed post-Hurricane Katrina. And I've got a link to this article in the post. According to this report, schools that focused mostly on skill recovery rather than teaching grade level content found that students were less engaged and scored poorly on tests. Whereas schools got better results when they took a spiraling approach, where the regular content is taught on its normal schedule and gaps in student skill and knowledge are filled in and scaffolded as needed. So if you're teaching a lesson on a particular topic, and that would be when you think, okay, what do they need in order to do this lesson? Maybe we missed this last year. So the reteaching happens sort of concurrently with the on-track grade level instruction. I don't know a whole lot about the particulars of this approach, but if it's something you're interested or intrigued by, the organization TNTP has put together a learning acceleration guide with this approach, and it can help you look more. So I've got a link to that over on the blog post. I think it's worth a look because this really was new information for me. And I know a lot of schools are going to be making that decision about how to actually approach the academic piece of it. So another consideration when you're looking at the different options is to make sure that you are getting input from all stakeholders. Schools are going to have the best chance of landing on a workable solution if you involve representatives from all stakeholder groups in your school community. That means while you're still in the exploratory phase, ask teachers, students, and parents for their input, and then ask again when you're narrowing your options. Do this in a way that gives them time to think through the proposed ideas and space to share their thoughts honestly. And make sure there's representation from diverse backgrounds in terms of socioeconomics, ethnicity, race, and language. Along those same lines, and this is another consideration, make equity and culturally responsive teaching an integral part of the plan. Any plan for reopening or restarting school must take into account how all students' needs will be met. A lot has been written about the ways that this pandemic has shown a light on existing inequities, and I've linked to a piece that I thought was especially good, written by Dina Simmons, about that topic. So working on a reopening plan is an opportunity to address some of those inequities more thoroughly than they've been addressed before. I've also linked to a collection of resources about culturally responsive teaching in remote situations. So that would be another good thing to take a look at as you are formulating a plan for next year. A couple more things to consider as you are considering plans. It came up on Twitter, the idea of looping. Looping is the practice of keeping the same teacher with a group of students over the course of several years. So if you are a third grade teacher, you would stay with that class as they go to fourth grade, and then you would become their fourth grade teacher, and then maybe even their fifth grade teacher. I've seen schools that do 2-year looping and 3-year looping, and I've seen it done at the middle school level also. And most people who have done looping have reported really, really significant success in terms of just the longevity of those relationships and how you can really capitalize on those. The suggestion came in light of the fact that a lot of our time with students was interrupted this past school year, but the relationships had started to be built. And so rather than start everyone with a new teacher this coming school year, move them to the next grade level, but keep them with the same teacher that they had from the year before so that you can continue to build on those existing relationships. This really may not be an option for the older grades, but it's something to put in the mix maybe as a possibility if you are at the younger grade levels. 2 other considerations. One is substitute availability. Substitute teachers are being held up right now as key players in some proposed scenarios. But in case no one has brought this up yet, in a lot of districts, a big number of subs are over age 55 and could therefore be more at risk for infection. So they may not be something that you can necessarily count on as part of your plan. And it would be something to look at if your plan includes a lot of substitute participation. One last consideration is childcare for teachers' kids. Many, many teachers are also parents. So if their own children can't go back to school full time, that poses a significant problem for the teachers as well. And it's something to consider when you are talking about bringing your workforce back into the building. That may be a big problem in terms of getting all of your teachers back to their full capacity. And it's a reality that you can't necessarily work around by saying, sorry, just deal with it. This is a situation that a lot of families are in, and I feel like districts will be better off by just facing that head on and treating it as a reality that has to be dealt with, as opposed to just moving forward as if that's not necessarily a problem. So those are some things to consider when looking at possible solutions. And then this last part, I just kind of wanted to tack on as, I guess, a little bit of a pep talk about facing the unknown. So here goes. Probably the only thing that's certain right now is that no one knows for sure what the next school year is going to look like. And this may very well be putting you in a state of paralysis, waiting for someone to tell you what the plan is so you can get moving with your own preparation. Here is what I would do in your shoes. First off, I would prepare for a full year of 100% distance learning. No matter what the specific plan looks like for next year, there is a good chance that at least some of your instruction is going to be delivered remotely. Even if your school manages to get kids into the building, social distancing will likely require students to get their materials and do much of their work on devices. So with that in mind, you're going to be better off if you have shifted a good part of your instruction into some kind of online format. Once it's there, you can still use it in face-to-face settings. You'll just have more opportunities to interact with students in real time. So here are some things that can help you with that process of shifting more of your content and instruction to some sort of an online, digital, remote format. One thing that can help is, now that you have a little more time, learn more about how to design instruction for online environments from people who have already fine-tuned the process. There are people who only ever taught online, and they have a lot to offer in terms of advice and tips and some sort of do's and don'ts about online instruction. A lot of people were just thrown into this and had to just sink or swim. But if you now have an opportunity to take a breath and re-examine the way that you do things, I would be seeking out those resources. Doing a simple Google of how to create an online course, that'll get you lots of results. Some of these are not being created by educators. There are people who create online courses, lots of them now, just for their businesses. And so those are sometimes created with more of a, how to make money from an online course or whatever. If you can kind of ignore that piece of it, there's actually a lot of great advice on keeping learners engaged and things that you can do to make your course better. So I would not dismiss those as irrelevant to educational settings. I've also linked to a couple of other articles that sort of do come from an educational perspective about some of the finer points of online teaching. So if you go over to the posts, those are there. Another way that you can, or another thing you can do when you are working on moving your instruction to online, is to seek out teachers who have some pieces of this remote learning puzzle figured out and learn from them. This could be teachers in your building. These could be teachers that you have met online. Think about the people who have said, I've had some success in this area, whether it's that they've gotten more engagement from students than most people. Maybe they're not quite as exhausted as most of your colleagues. Maybe they've had one or two pretty good lessons throughout this time. Whatever it is, see what those people can teach you. You're going to get bits and pieces from different people, and that's going to help. One last thing about shifting your stuff to online is to consider curricular options that are already available online. And one great one is Khan Academy. I know Khan Academy's got the reputation for just being sort of a math site. And if you haven't checked it out in a while, they've got a lot of stuff. I actually got to interview Sal Khan, who's the founder of Khan Academy, in episode 116, where he really broke down for me the whole system that they have now. It's a mastery learning system that they have placed onto the videos that they used to have, to where you can actually put kids into sort of a course where you can get feedback on how well they're doing, and they progress through, and it really gives you great sort of analytics on how they've done. And Khan Academy now has courses, free courses, in a lot of different subject areas that are besides just math. So I would check those out too, because, even though it's not you teaching them necessarily, it's just taking the curriculum piece and getting that taken care of. And then you're still going to be the one who is relationship building and supporting your students. It's just that you're taking that piece out of it. And it's already in a format that was optimized for online learning. So if you're finding yourself sort of scrambling for, like, how do I actually turn my instruction into online, that may be something to consider. Just relying on something that is already made and then kind of building on that with your own twists or your own touches. So back to this topic of what would I be doing in your shoes. The first would be preparing everything for a full year of online learning and just sort of resigning myself to that. Another would be to create some contingency plans. So when you're organizing your lessons for the upcoming year, you can build in contingency plans for different scenarios. So maybe you set up all of your lessons for remote learning, but you mark a few places here and there where, if things work if things change to allow face-to-face teaching, or even in a situation where social distancing is no longer required, you could do something different, like a lab or group activity that's always been a big favorite, or something that really works well. So, build in those contingency plans. Another thing is to give yourself space to grieve. Throughout this process, it may be helpful to occasionally stop and just let yourself grieve all of the incredible experiences teachers and students won't get to have right now and for the foreseeable future. Although dwelling on this for long periods of time won't be terribly useful, it also doesn't help to pretend any of this is normal. Acknowledging the loss will allow you, your colleagues, and your students to feel validated. And this could free you up to move on and do what you can under the current constraints. Finally, I would push back on unreasonable expectations. Speaking of acting like any of this is normal, I get the sense that there may be some in leadership who are plowing ahead as if instruction is going to continue at the exact same level of quality as before. Although high-quality instruction is obviously the goal, sending a message that denies current challenges can crush teachers' spirits. If you happen to be working in a district where expectations are far beyond reality, push back. Find others who you can join forces with, compose a letter or a document that offers more reasonable alternatives, and present it to your administration. It can and has worked. For more thoughts on this, listen to episode 119 of the podcast or read my post, We're a Family and Other School Norms That Can Cause Teacher Burnout. This is an interview that I did with Angela Watson, and we talked about a lot of these unreasonable expectations that can cause a lot of problems for teachers, and a lot of times teachers just go along with them. Your administration in general is doing the best they can. And if they don't know that something is a problem, then they can't change it. So it's worth it to find some way to let them know if those expectations are just not reasonable at all. So I have one last thought before I close. When you really look at this situation that we're in, what makes all of this so hard to do is that we want to be together. If we were okay staying 6 feet apart for the rest of our lives, this wouldn't be such a challenge. But good teaching is an intimate experience, and most teachers are at their best when they can stand close to examine student work, give hugs and high fives, have private conversations. Good teachers know how important relationship building is to the process, not only the teacher-student relationship, but relationships between our students. Our students want to bump shoulders and bend their heads together in whispered secrets. They want to hug each other. They want to mess around on the playground or at the bus stop. They want to dance and laugh together. We still want and desperately need this connection, this physical connection. I think it's important to stop and recognize that because it's good news. Over the last 10 years or so, as smartphones took over and we got more and more addicted to screens, we have all collectively shaken our heads at how disconnected we had become. But this pandemic has demonstrated that we weren't actually disconnected. Yes, the devices made things different, but the whole time we were still finding ways to be close, to touch each other, to share physical space. It turns out we really do need that. And I think this is wonderful news. In 2013, Coca-Cola produced a Super Bowl commercial that I never forgot. It was a montage of footage captured by security cameras all over the world. Quick clips of people hugging, kissing, doing kind things for each other, celebrating together. In every clip, people are physically close together in ways that are starting to look shocking to me within our current context. The reason that commercial was so popular then and why it resonates with me even more deeply now is because this is who we are. The normal we long to get back to. It's that longing that's making all of this so difficult. I believe we will get back there someday, and I think we'll be much less likely to ever take it for granted again. Until then, we do the best we can. giving lots of grace to each other and to ourselves. For links to all the resources mentioned in this episode, visit cultofpedagogy.com, click podcast, and choose episode 146. To get a weekly email from me about my newest blog posts, podcast episodes, and products, sign up for my mailing list at cultofpedagogy.com/subscribe. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day.